How many of you are here for Sweden Games Conference? Almost all of you. How many of you are here for serious games? Oh, how many of you are here for both then? Oh, okay. All right, well, I decided that maybe I should talk a little bit then about how games teach, but not just on the side of how they teach in the boring serious games way. Because a lot of serious games are kind of boring. But also how they teach even people who play just ordinary everyday games, the kinds of games that are set up back there. You know, there's this old saying, right? It's better to teach someone to fish than it is to just feed them, right? Although they've been feeding us fish here, and it's much appreciated, you know. Hopefully the conference is teaching us to fish in some way. It's teaching us to make games better, right? It's teaching us to perform our craft in ways that are just more sophisticated. We learn things by interacting with one another. Of course, we very quickly discovered that there's far more for us to learn than we can ever possibly get a hold of. And the thing that's a little bit distressing about that is that in practice, we actually have fairly little knowledge of how to make games that has been codified. There's a lot of stuff that we basically pass on through apprenticeship right now. Not even teaching, but apprenticeship, like old-fashioned medieval guild apprenticeship, sometimes complete with the indentured servitude part, right? So it is worth thinking more deeply about how exactly we make games, what it is that games do, what it is that games mean, and we've already had several talks in the last couple of days about that kind of thing. Mike Sellers, for example, spoke about game loops and, you know, atomic structures and flows and parts and so on. We've had several talks referencing the fact that a lot of educational games aren't very fun, right? So all of these subjects have been coming up. But it's a keynote, so I was like, well, but you don't really want to see diagrams. So I thought instead I would tell a fairy tale. Are there any, how many designers are in the room? All right, you're in the front row, so you're going to be designer number 1. Sorry. Any others? Who else? More designers. All right, you're designer 2, you're designer 3. Oh, any more? Please. Oh, all right. No, Josephine, we need a woman because actually we really should drop one of the guys. Who was back there? You're out. You're in. All right. Okay. You are bringing me a game about fishing. You're all going to be bringing me games about fishing. Sorry if you don't like fishing. You're bringing me a game about fishing, and you're going to show me this awesome custom controller that you have designed for this game. Tell me, how is it that you're using the accelerometer in this in order to really make it cool? Did you not play the Sega fishing? Come on. It's a custom controller.
Yeah, I suppose it's just like that, but I honestly don't know the exact, like, technically, if you want to know the technical spec behind it.
So why did you make the decision to have a real fishhook on it? Realism, I guess, right? I mean, we've seen this game, right? This fishing game, we've seen this. This is a fishing game that's all in the controls, right? And that's a perfectly valid kind of game, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, don't ever make a game that relies on custom controller. It's business suicide, but other than that, we've seen that game, and it's kind of interesting. There are a lot of games that depend on custom controllers. Everything about the Wii, that was based on essentially control patterns, right? The games themselves were not very sophisticated. It was mostly about the controls. But somebody else said, no. Let's see. I guess you're next in line. So you tell me about your fishing game, because you gave me this giant spreadsheet of all of the different things that you can pull up. I see tuna, I see sardines, and I see boots and a treasure ship. Yeah.
Why I did that?
Yeah, why'd you do that?
I thought big diversity was interesting. People wanted to explore and find new things.
Find new things hidden in the bottom of the ocean. Yeah, and but how do I get the boot instead of the tuna if I really want the boot?
You just have to fish for a long time.
Oh, that's too realistic. It's too realistic. Okay. Okay, so who was next? You were next. So this pitch is all about sitting by the dock talking a really long time with my dad, who's imparting life lessons that are supposed to be meaningful. And he keeps drinking beer, which I'm not old enough to have yet. So can you tell me why you spent 2 years on the chat system for your fishing game? That's you, yeah.
Yeah, the whole thought was basically to get like the interaction. So I thought about a voice system where you could actually speak to your own father
Yeah.
in real life.
So you're really about the experience here. You really want to capture that feeling of utter boredom.
Well, it was all about the realistic.
Yeah. So, Josephine, I understand that you can tell me the exact caloric intake of every minnow in this river.
Of course. Well, you have to learn stuff, so you need to like really get it correct and get everything where it's supposed to be. So, okay. Sorry about that.
Oh.
Woohoo! Well, of course, you need to get everything correct. You need to have every detailed part, because then you can learn, and you can learn as much as you want to. So if you're a real nerd, you can go really into it. And we all like nerds, right?
So, how are you solving the problem of the fact that I can't see the water for all of the graphs in the way?
Why would you want to see the water?
Fortunately, something has come to the rescue, because this is when the magic fish appears. The magic fish says, you know what? Each of you has made a game that is representative of one piece of fishing. And they're not bad kinds of fishing, but, you know, none of them are really the kind of fishing necessarily that encompasses everything about the experience. That's what we normally do. When we make a game, we have to choose to only represent certain parts of the thing that we are mimicking. And we choose to put emphasis on different aspects of it. In this case, whether it was the control, whether it was the surface experience, whether it was the unpredictability and chance, or whether it was rich and deep simulation, we're actually building radically different games about the exact same thing. In fact, these 4 games could even look identical and play completely differently, right? It's entirely possible. So when suddenly, you know, the producer comes along and says, I don't understand what this game is, we can even have real trouble communicating this to an audience, to management, right? And these days, if you can't describe what you're doing, even to fellow members of your team sometimes, the whole game can spiral out of control. It's actually pretty easy for it to happen, right? Particularly as teams get bigger. So when all of a sudden the magic fish appears emergently out of this mess of a system that we've built, we actually generally don't even know how to cope. And then the producer says, no, that's the part I like, it stays. He's exhausted, it's 3 a.m. You report the magic fish of emergence or whatever other weird thing is now in your game, and he's so tired, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's not a bug, it's a fixture. Sorry. Okay. So, here's the thing, right? When we look at games, it can be incredibly difficult to actually convey what it is that we're trying to get across. And the place where this is super, super important is actually in serious games. In serious games, we typically make games that actually fail to get across both the lesson and the game. That happens all the time. Right? We either spend too much time chasing the lesson and fail to get a game, or we spend too much time chasing the game and fail to get a lesson across. It's really easy to make that mistake. But this happens also in regular games, because in regular games, we don't tend to stop and think about the fact that we are also teaching things all the time. That is actually what games do. It is the most fundamental thing that games do, is teach you how to play them. Right? So, we come back to you, and I guess the critique is going to be, so you have this awesome control system, but I'm pretty sure that after I cast the rod, you literally just spawn the fish on the fly to make sure I catch something. Right? That's actually how most fishing games work. That's actually how we spawn most encounters in AAA games today. right? There's no there. There's literally no lesson being taught except how to maneuver the controller. These days,
Right?
right? Is that? When was the last time you played a racing game, anyone? Have you noticed that knowing where to go with your car is no longer part of the game? They actually put a stripe on the road telling you how to optimally drive.
Have you played Trackmania?
Are you trying to derail the talk? No. Yeah, okay. Moving on. So, one of the key things that racing games used to teach was how to optimally take curves. But we've actually taken that lesson out and solved it for you in the name of giving you a better experience, right? Well, of course, that is not how fish spawn, and we are actually providing a very false picture of reality, an underlying lesson that, hey, if you just do what I tell you, a reward is going to pop up. If you think about that, that's actually kind of a pernicious lesson to be teaching people, right? But nonetheless, it is an implication in that game design. It's a lesson we're not taking the time to consider. For that matter, you know, if we're hitting just this luck table, there isn't any skill involved, right? I mean, if there's no exercise of skill whatsoever, all we're doing is leveraging a bug in the human software system, right? Which is the fact that we're lousy at projecting odds. Plus, it doesn't give much credit to the fish. If you've ever tried to catch a fish, you know that they're really not that stupid, right? It's actually a little hard to catch a fish. They do dodge and that kind of thing. So reducing everything down to chance is a super easy design tactic. It's an easy design trick, but it's also teaching us false lessons, right? Then we have the chat person who says, but the experience is incredibly important. Many, many games these days are built entirely on experience, and it could be argued that the experience trumps whatever is in the mechanics. Lots of people make that case. Certainly the entire AAA industry makes that case because there's hardly any mechanics in AAA games anymore. Right? We spend most of our budget, most of our time, and most of our effort in large games in creating experience-based games. Further, this has actually trickled down into indie quite a lot. Indie these days is heavily narrative as well. Right? And the interesting thing about that is that it's actually a bit of a trap. Narrative is expensive. So from a business point of view, you actually have to be super careful about it. Of course, you know, there's definitely no teaching somebody to fish if what you're doing is just trying to aim for the cool experience. No tuna sandwich for you. And then, of course, we have Josephine's game, which is, no, but I'm teaching you all about the fish. This is the real one, right? This is the one that is mechanically rich. It's the one that's a simulation. This is what leverages the power of computation and all the rest. You know, and there's a case to be made there, certainly. This is where classic systems design lives, and it makes the fish feel great, but it often doesn't make the player feel great, because if we can't tell that this rich simulation is happening, we won't learn a damn thing, right? If we can't get the surface to convey the message of the math behind it, it's not going to actually teach us anything. So each of these is actually teaching lessons. Some of them are teaching implicit lessons we didn't intend. Some of them are teaching lessons that we did plan. And they're also, at the same time, often failing to teach us critical parts of information. The answer, though, isn't necessarily to go and make the game that has the custom controller, the voice chat system, random chance layered on top of a simulation, because you're not going to finish, right? And really, trying to do everything is going to end up being a game that doesn't have a point. And if there's one thing that any work of art, and yes, I'm going to use the word art, if there's one thing it needs to have a point, a reason to exist, right? Otherwise, you might as well go fishing instead. So, it's not that any of these games are wrong. The key thing that we need to be able to do as creators is make the right game for the right situation. I'm impressed. Nobody is groaning. There's a reason for that. Right? Right, Mike? Yeah. So, in your case, designer number one, you've actually made a game entirely about haptics. Okay? Haptics. Literally the mechanics of our movement and how they interface with the machine, right? That's literally what that is. And that's great, because haptics is also pretty much all of sports. We are a machine, in one sense. That interface to the physical, learning how to master aspects of our own body and our own interface control systems, is one of the 4 great areas of game design. And it's actually one that we tend to neglect. We tend to not think about sports as being part of our discipline. And that's wrong. You made a game about chance. There's nothing wrong with chance. Chance is an enormous equalizer. Chance is a thing that gives the young and the inept the opportunity to learn and improve. So chance is incredibly powerful. It's just a little bit like sugar. It's great in moderation. But, you know, if you make your whole meal out of it, it's kind of empty calories. So it's a lot of fun in the right doses. And it is, in fact, one of the 4 great areas of games. Chance-based games. You made a game that was really about the other people. That's wonderful. I don't suppose, you know, even finding courses in multiplayer game design is hard. But I personally have never seen a course at a game school on sociology, team building, anthropology, and so on. But those are the fields that tie back to what you're doing here. Psychology and so on, right? All of a sudden we're getting into pretty deep waters. And this is also an area that historically games as an industry have chosen to not ignore, because it makes lots of money, but how about under-design, right? Not think about very much. Otherwise, we wouldn't end up with, all of the social problems that we end up having. We wouldn't end up with voice chat on Xbox Live. But social games, not the Facebook sense, is in fact the 3rd great kind of games. And of course, the 4th kind is games about complexity, right? Now, complexity, really, we're talking in the strict math sense here. We're talking about problems and systems that are intriguing in their own right? That have, they're like complex machines. They're like mobiles hanging from the ceiling that we poke them and they wiggle in interesting ways. And we're trying to figure out, when I poke it here, why does it wiggle like that over there, right? And that's great. This is traditional classic systems design. And frankly, as game designers, we have really, really radically failed over 30 years to be able to codify what we know about this as a craft. And that was kind of what Mike's entire talk was about yesterday, right? Because it's a really hard problem, right? So each of these is actually a really large problem. And in some sense, they're actually all about complexity in different ways. Because all of them are about interacting with either a complex system, because people are a complex system, or interacting with the illusion of a complex system in the case of chance. Because, as I mentioned earlier, chance is actually a bug in our brain. The way in which we deal with probability is that we think there's a pattern. I have a system for the horses, I swear, right? And there isn't actually a pattern there. Our brain fools us. Some anthropological researchers speculate that the reason for that is if we were good at calculating odds, we would not have left the cave, because odds of that saber-toothed tiger getting us were actually pretty good. Now, of course, fish don't have to worry about things like managing their body. They never trip over, you know, and chance, you know, our brains are terrible at it, but it's so easy. We go ahead and we use it all the time. And that's fine. But what we often don't do is make a considered choice about when to use one kind of mechanic, one kind of system, one kind of approach over another. And the fact is that they serve very different purposes and they have very different strengths. So, haptics is the realm of roller coasters. It is the realm of cool motion-based controllers. It's the realm of Dance Dance Revolution. It is the realm of playing football. It is running around and playing tag with your friends, although of course tag is also down here, right? And there are lots of reasons why the body wants us to practice at using it. right? It is a survival skill. A lot of these things boil down to being survival skills. Games in a lot of ways are just about, this is why kids play them, so that the world doesn't eat them quickly, right? They need to play games to learn how to walk. They need to play games to learn how to navigate a piece of food onto a fork and from the fork into their mouth without stabbing themselves in the eye. And so we make a game out of that. So do kittens, right? So do puppies. This is how all mammals work, is that they play games in order to learn how to solve these problems. We end up needing to learn how to do those kinds of things and solve mathematical puzzles, by and large involving, let's say, calculus, which is, being able to take second-order derivatives is what you need to do in order to play catch. So you have to learn how to do that at a really rapid rate. You need to master non-Euclidean geometry in order to play snakes and ladders, right? Because that space is absolutely not a two-dimensional Cartesian coordinate system, right? And in fact, mathematicians have told us that most classic board games fall in a complexity range, a formal mathematical complexity range, between p-space complete and NP-hard problems. And you can just go to Wikipedia, find the page on NP-hard problems, and it's like, oh, there's Sudoku, and there's building a raid group in World of Warcraft, and so on down the line. Because that is actually at the heart of game systems design. Unfortunately, it's the kind of thing that you really don't hit until you've done, 5 or 6 years worth of mathematics study. And we really need to be teaching it in freshman game design class, because it's the heart of game systems design. Social problems, right? Almost everything we do in the world when we relate to other people is about making sure our tribe comes out ahead and that the people in our tribe know that we are the monkey on top who gets to fling the most poop, right? An enormous amount of social behaviors are about establishing relative status, about mentorship, about tribalism, and about identifying the people who are not us. It's kind of baked into our psychology to dislike the people not like us. And we actually have some enormous brain bugs around just kind of going along with anybody who does look like us, which is one of the many things that, like, door-to-door salesmen use this. Marketers use this all over the place. So there's a pile of known techniques there that exploit these things. And then, of course, there's chance. Most games do, in fact, make use of a little of each. But all of them share this common classic loop, right? They all start with the player needs to decide what to do. They need to be able to tell whether or not there's an affordance, that's a term from product design and psychology, around whether or not there's something on the screen that they know that they can press in order to create an input that they map to a verb that goes into a black box system of rules that is actually mediating the simulation and the interaction, typically with an opponent or another player. That could be an AI, it could be another person. Whatever that verb was goes in to cause a simulation update, which then results in an opponent response. This changes the state of the environment, right? And then we send back some amount of display information that tells you what changed. Maybe we send you the whole maps. Maybe we send you get to see the entire chessboard in the case of chess. But in other games, maybe all you see is a bullet flying towards you. The result of that is that various forms of narrative are constructed. A huge amount of it is narrative that we build ourselves, attempting to make sense of the universe, because that's how our brains work. Some of it is probably narrative that the game designer is throwing at you in a classic storytelling attempt at mind control, because that is what stories are mostly for. And then we use that in order to form a new sense of intent and rebuild our mental model, and then we rinse repeat 60 times a second. Right? All the games do this. And actually, it's not 60 times a second. Human frame rate is actually around 265 milliseconds. So we actually only get to do 16 moves per frame per second. But the fact is that if we want to get good at our craft, that model is inadequate. It's hugely incomplete. And that seems really unfair, especially if you're like an undergraduate game designer. Right? Because we've already hit, how many fields did I just go over? Well, that's not even close to what games actually look like. Not even. You guys want to know what games actually look like? Yeah? You want to get really depressed? So first, you do have that mental model, and that's good. But what you actually do when you're approaching a problem is that you don't have a solution. You try to form a heuristic. It's an approximation of a solution to the problem. Using that heuristic, you form for yourself an impression of what the designer's intent of the objective is, right? Which is not the same thing as what your objective might be. Using the information about that objective, which may provide you with high or low agency. And that right there is actually a massively consequential choice, because high agency games and low agency games teach radically different things and have radically different craft techniques. Based on that, finally you form an impression of what your goal is, right? So in Minecraft, which is a high agency environment, your goal has barely been dictated to you. There was hardly any sense of an objective. You were told don't get killed by a creeper and not much else. But in a low agency game, like say Call of Duty, you've been told, well, you have to go out through that door within 2 minutes and 35 seconds, right? And in that case, objective and goal line up pretty well. Great. But even then, once you form the goal, then you have to find the affordance, identify a verb, figure out how that verb is mapped to an input. Maybe your key's remapped. Where's the stupid red X on this controller? You know, whatever. So that you can finally, in order to perform an action. And the action gets fed into that black box of rules. And inside that black box of rules is a complex structure, which I've taken to calling a ludic structure. A ludic structure is any kind of system that hits that complexity threshold. That isn't just the rules of chess, it is the rules of physics. It is music. The system of complex waveforms vibrating in the air is also a system complex enough for us to play. It's not an accident that we play an instrument. It's not an accident that we put on a play when we're doing theater, because that is also a complex enough system to have unpredictable emergent results. So once we find a ludic structure, then those are the ones that start falling into these different categories. The things that they all have in common is that they offer broad enough possibility space, right? Because if they are trivial, we find them boring. And if they are too noisy, we also find them boring, right? There really isn't anything totally noisy in the world. Even the static on a dead channel is actually mathematically predictable if you happen to have enough data about the local magnetic fields and interference in the weather. It's just we can't process it, so we call it noise. But noise is just data we don't have the equipment to understand, right? There really isn't any noise out there. That's our failure, right? So what that leads to is the idea that when we find a complex enough system, we begin to try to interpret it. So what's at the heart then of interesting systems is interpretability, and the idea that maybe they have some kind of an inner life, that maybe there's actually something on the inside there that is talking back to us in some interesting, complicated way, because we anthropomorphize everything. So once we have that, it's fairly easy to see why gamification usually fails, because it's usually stacked on top of non-ludic systems, systems that are trivial, like fly enough and I'll give you more points, right? There's no interpretability to that. I interpret you want my money and I'm done, right? And that is what leads quickly to boredom and a failure of a game. And that's actually why gamification tends to fail, because it's trying to use the rest of this loop without implementing the hard part, the part that we lack most lingo, most language, and most knowledge to talk about, which is these ludic structures, right? But then the ludic structures are sometimes designed. We don't design physics. We actually, if we go design a real-life sport, we kind of say import realworldphysics.dll at the top of our game design, right? Somebody already wrote that code. And that's great, because so far no major bugs have been found, but we don't understand it all. So I call those ludic artifacts, the act of consciously attempting to build a system like that. And those are the ones that fall into a bunch of different kinds of problems. The first one that we can talk about is, in fact, the one of that cool controller. That's kind of a visceral problem. It's a haptic problem. It's a problem of interacting with our own selves. And we do have, for example, there's exactly one book on this enormous subject. Thank God it's excellent. Steve Swink, Game Feel. One. Okay? Keep in mind that the kinds of things that are hidden underneath this are the fact that every single best-selling platformer game in history, this takes the same amount of time, and nobody planned that. Isn't that weird? Mario, FPSs, that jump time in the air is the same. And guess what? Anybody want to guess what that time interval is? This one. We unconsciously, in the games, tuned for feel and matched the real jump time of humans. Right? Talk about not knowing what we're doing, right? About being completely unaware of the systems underneath things. So feel, of course, feeds back into the notion of training. That is actually what most reflex-based visceral problems do. We use them for training. The military has known this for years. Sports athletes, people have known this for years. We use those to turn them into these abstractions, these chunks, these schema, these patterns, all the way down to simple things like, if I ask you, which leg of your pants did you put on this morning, you probably don't know. Which one came first, right? Because we internalize them to that degree. We run them as background processes. But visceral problems are only one. We have the interaction problem. We have the chat one. But hidden behind chat, oh my gosh, well, interaction causes a social problem. Social problems are about othering. They're about identity. They're about mentorship. They're about tribalism. They're about hierarchy. Pretty much everything, right? Everything we do with other people. The number of fields that exist in these bubbles is enormous. Right? You can go get PhDs in psychology, anthropology, cultural history, and so on down the line, just in order to try to understand how to properly build your economic system in your MMO. You have to, or you will fail. Then, of course, there's complexity problems, game systems. One interesting thing about that is that complexity is kind of relative. To a little kid, tic-tac-toe is pretty complicated. And then there comes a moment when we get over the threshold. But hidden behind that, you have the systems of rules that lead into the complexity problems, sometimes designed, sometimes created through the folk process, as most board games were over the course of centuries. And those lead us into complicated problems like topology, non-Euclidean space, simulation issues, which are extremely challenging to do with stochastic and nonlinear behaviors. There's economic problems. All of those sorts of problems lurk back there. And then you have chance, which mostly dead ends, thank goodness. And then we still have to tell you what changed. We have to give you the delta on the state, what things were modified. We have to give you a view of the overall state and decide whether or not to present you with perfect or imperfect information. And that could change on a feature-by-feature basis. It could change on a control-by-control basis. Because here's one of the hideous realizations you come to as you're this far down the curve. You start realizing, wait, but that means pressing the fishing controller button was a haptic game in the social game of talking to my dad. And then I have my chance-based complexity problem of what am I pulling up that's running against the nonlinear simulation. And you start realizing that every single action you take in a game has all of these. Every verb, every button press, every single thing you do. So from the imperfect information, you start cloaking it in metaphor because people learn better through metaphor. They learn better through stories. You have to go read every book written by Edward Tufte on information design in order to learn how to get across these complex mathematical landscapes. And from that, you start forming a sense of the story and the narrative and the myth, and you combine that with the kind of story that the designer is trying to tell you, right? And these days, of course, that can be a pretty imposing kind of story. Stories are primarily meant for acculturation. When you watch a fun comedy, the fun comedy is trying to brainwash you into agreeing with what the norms of society are, right? We have used stories for that for centuries. They are primarily about cultural transmission. They're primarily about building a certain degree of conformity and a certain degree of empathy among people within a society. Empathy is their sweet spot. That is what the great stories do. You take empathy and that leads you to the notion of play, but from the semiotics side rather than the fun side. The notion of signs and signifiers not quite matching up and the fact that there's space for interpretation. And all of a sudden we connect play and art up there all the way down to the possible inner life of a complex system. And we begin to realize, oh, so when I try to figure out how the river works on the inside, I'm also trying to figure out how my dad works on the inside. And we start realizing that this notion of play, of possibility space, of interpretation lies at the heart of understanding pretty much everything. And that leads us to art. It leads us to the MDA framework, the notion of dynamics. And from that, we start building up an intuition, because almost nothing of this is happening at the conscious level. We use it in order to build up background learning. And the reward that our brain gives us for that background learning is what we call fun. But fun's not the only thing you can do with a game, of course, because you could practice with it. You can train with it. You can use it as a form of exercise. You could use it for meditation or comfort. How many of you sat down to play an old game that you've beaten many times over because you had a cold and you just really wanted to go visit Mario again, right? Yeah, so you can use it for comfort. You can use it for meditation. You can use it to put yourself into flow. Or you can use it as yet another way to be bored. Yeah. And this is the moment when the designer says, holy crap, how long am I supposed to study to do this? All of a sudden, doing a dual emphasis in high-end 3D rendering and distributed network programming sounds easy, right? And yes, I am here to tell you, if you want to tackle the toughest problems in the game industry, game design is where it's at. But you're going to need a really big library. So yeah, that's what you do. I have no shortcuts. There aren't any. But you come out the other side, well, you're actually partway in, but it looks like a stopping point anyway. And you say, but wait, that means that my game with this custom controller has like a unique magical strength to it, because it teaches a kind of lesson that no other one of these fishing games can teach. None of these other games are going to actually teach me the precise number of degrees that I need to twist my wrist, right? Now that might not seem like an incredibly useful thing, unless of course you make a living fishing, whereupon it's critical, right? So we shouldn't denigrate it. Sometimes we do. Right? Sometimes we look down on games, oh, that's just a reflex-based shooter thing, right? We do that. We do the same thing. We look down on Peggle sometimes, and we get very snobbish about the fact that it's nothing but interface, right? It's nothing but feedback and ode to joy. There's no game there. And we get snobbish about that. But the thing is, each of these actually has great strengths. The thing you need to do, though, is be aware of what you're making. Be thoughtful enough in your design to know which of these tools and techniques you're going to leverage. If you are attempting to train somebody, the thing that you're trying to do is teach them not to have to think about a particular problem set, so they react based on reflexes, based on their experience. And the key tools that work for that, cutscenes, triggers, and loss of control, faking everything, is actually incredibly important. Almost all, from flight simulators to training a firefighter, is based on creating a lot of fakery that doesn't have simulation behind it. Right? Because if you start simulating, you'll never get done, because it's about constraining choices, because you don't want people to start developing their own goals and wandering off, right? I just watched San Andreas on the flight over. This movie begins with an LA Fire Department helicopter pilot. You know, an earthquake hits LA, he's flying over the city, and he says, oh, I guess I'm going to fly to San Francisco. That's not what you want their training to lead to, right? So you take away choices. You have to use classic educational scaffolding. How many of you know that term because you're on the serious game side? The rest of you need to go Google that term after the talk. You know, it's the step of building learning on learning, and one of the classic examples is actually Level 1, World 1, Super Mario. Speed and reflex training, selective agency, and, this might sound shocking, liberal use of tropes is absolutely critical in training. Because tropes and stereotypes and generalizations are absolutely vital to how the brain functions, as distasteful as that is, right? Because we cannot operate with large volumes of data. We need to be able to cluster it into clumps. And so all training methods rely on getting people to see broad classifications and respond to them quickly. On the other hand, if what you're trying to do is instead build empathy, you have a completely different set of tools. You need to use loose symbolic relationships. Think limbo, think braid, ambiguity, right? Those are the tools that you need to use. All of a sudden, the mechanics that you use start to change, because you start trying to do things like asking the audience for their opinion, or giving them two choices, both of which are equally valid or good, or creating moments of surrealism to shock people out of only seeing tropes and symbols and generalizations. And if you do that, you can build a story that is richly interpretable. You can build a story that people can find themselves in. You can build a story where they learn things about other people in ways that they didn't expect. If, on the other hand, you are trying to bring them into a culture, let's say, how many of you are doing serious games that are about, I don't know, teaching tolerance, for example? Anybody? That's actually an example of an enculturation game. You are attempting to get the person to conform to a new social norm that you are attempting to build. And there are tools to doing this. There are ways in which we do this. There are approaches that we have. There are things we do like repeating a phrase over and over again, because there are things in our brain that make us respond to that. Right? You go study the field of rhetoric, and you find a giant library of tools and techniques that have been used for centuries in order to get people to agree with you. Like staring into your eyes and mimicking the movement that you make. And doing exactly the same pose and leaning back. Yeah. And you're more likely to agree with me. Right? Use of frames and labels. Right? How many of you seen a war movie lately? Right? Those almost always carry incredible amounts of framing around them in order to start you out in sort of presupposed areas, presupposed points of view. And before long, you find yourself already half agreeing with whatever the movie is telling you to think, right? So these are the tools of propaganda, but they are also the tools of community building and culture. Propaganda is the term that we use when we don't like what we're being told, right? But the fact is, the same tools are the tools of bringing us together. They're the same devices. Even all the way down to intentionally othering, which we do all the time in games. Those of you who work in games for tolerance or games where we're, well, any kind of game where we're attempting to make people care more about others, the number of times that we've made a game trying to do that and then still had a bad guy in it, of any sort whatsoever, you're going ahead and using othering to get your point across, right? And of course, high causality, because one thing that you absolutely want to happen if you're trying to enculture someone is to make them think that this is how it should be. And that means you present extremely plausible causal chains, right? Of course this leads to that, right? Because that's what you want. If, on the other hand, what you're attempting to do is build people's intuitive library, this is where the complexity stuff lies, right? Because we usually can't cope consciously with complexity. Instead, we use those heuristics. Those tend to be unconscious. So you're going to use systems that involve NP problems. You're going to use multiplayer because players almost always instantly add complexity to the system. You're going to actually have orthogonal goals and multiple games piled into one. You build sandbox environments or simulations, right? All of those are tools for building intuition as opposed to empathy, for building intuition as opposed to training. Because intuition and training actually lead you to very different places. So there is a library of these techniques, and each of these styles of games has very different magic powers, because these are kind of magical. We are literally rewiring brains, people. I mean, come on. Who else gets to make that claim? Neurosurgeons, right? I mean, them and us, that's it. So the key thing here is, if we want to take our craft seriously, and further, I'll say, our responsibility seriously, because let's be honest, we're going to make games anyway, right? So if we're making games anyway, I personally think we should be trying to do this stuff consciously rather than just letting shit happen. And right now we do an awful lot of letting shit happen because we do not understand our own tools. And so we say to the fish, can you teach us magic? And the thing is, it isn't magic. We actually just need to expend the effort to think deeply about our own discipline. We need to do things like arrive at the underlying science, the underlying rules of harmony, the underlying choreography, the underlying physics of how these kinds of systems work. And lots of people have been trying for quite some time to do exactly that, and Mike spoke a little bit about that yesterday. And this is it's a massively multidisciplinary kind of effort, and there are not enough designers trying to solve these problems today. Like, there's so few of us that we get together for dinner at GDC every year and we fit on one table. Seriously. And I'm going to tell you something. Apologies to all the professors. A music professor did not invent the well-tempered scale. A musician did. This is on designers to solve, not on the academics. They'll teach it after we figure it out. Because if we don't figure it out, someone else will come along and enculturate and train us into their system. And we might not like it. Right? And this has begun to happen. In the absence of a craft, a formalized method, a system of game design, these guys showed up instead and said, guess what? We have all the answers. And their answers were plausible enough that it worked for a while. And, certainly we've seen a lot of business successes that lasted a few years at least, based on these approaches, right? But the fact of the matter is that they fall in the trap of looking through only the one lens. And if there's one takeaway from this talk, I hope it's that you realize you need to learn to look through 100 lenses, and ideally keep all those pictures in your head at once, because that is crucial to game design. Because otherwise, you land in the realm of metrics, and the metrics guys, they just do averages. And average is not where you want to be. Average is where you chase the magic away. It's going to leave. It's not what you want to be doing. Because fundamentally, when you take averages, you wash out the high points, the low points too. But you turn it all into a sameness. You reduce it just to the almighty dollar. You collapse away all of that glorious, complex beauty that lies in those rich systems that we just talked about. And that's just kind of a crime. Because if you just boil everything about our human experience into ARPDAO, right, you're washing away a hell of a lot. And that is not where game design should go. Please God. Right? Because that metrics guy will tell you that little bit of magic didn't matter very much. Right? Who cares? My average is still up. And when I take all the fish in the ocean and I add them up and I divide, on average, no fishes are magical. So please, go forth and tackle the big problems. We all deserve it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Raph. So we have time for one or two questions, and then I know you're off to another thing just after this. But one or two questions, please.
There's a microphone moving back there. Yes, I'll put them up on my site for sure, and I don't know, I mean, they have a copy here now. Also, I see a camera there, so I am suspicious that this may have actually been recorded for blackmail purposes.
First of all, thank you very much for your talk. I never think I will find someone that actually read my mind and put it on slides. And well, I have been thinking about the same stuff for quite a long time. I just don't have the credentials to go up there and say it. The thing is that I also come from an interdisciplinary background, and I see every single point you pointed in your slides, I see it. But I also see a big problem. I'm not a designer, I'm a psychologist, and I have worked a lot of times with designers. And I see that, of course, like no one is a library to have all those skills. At least you can develop very good 3 and mediumly good 5 of them, but not all of them. Nevertheless, when I have worked with other people, designers, programmers, and all the teams, especially for designing serious games, I find a huge problem, and is that everybody thinks like an island. So even though I said like, okay, from psychology perspective, this doesn't work, they end up doing whatever because like, okay, this looks better, or these mechanics are easier to implement, or I don't know, we don't have the time, or we don't have the budget, and they don't listen to each other.
Yeah.
So it looks like nobody is a library to have all those skills, but then they don't want to see each other to work together as a library, so to say.
Yeah.
So how would you tackle this problem, or which you, I don't know, which solution would you give, or would you make a game to teach how to teamwork to design games?
Okay, I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer is you're describing a psychology problem, actually most specifically a management science problem. So go find a manager and have them solve the problem for you, because there are in fact ways to solve that problem. It's a tractable problem, it's been dealt with. But the real answer is yes, those library people do exist. Many of them are in this room, actually. I'll go ahead and say I am one. Most of the best known game designers whose names you know are people like that. And the solution that has been practical, I hate to say it, is for autodidacts to train themselves obsessively, reading in every field they can because they just get curious about, I wonder how quantum mechanics connects to astrology, because they're just people like that, and they go on game design retreats where they actually have those discussions for hours on end for no apparent reason. I'll be at one next weekend. Literally, there are like dozens of game designer secret societies that hold retreats to do that, okay? So there is a group of people who train themselves to be massively interdisciplinary Renaissance people. That is what they do. And in this industry, what they end up being is creative directors. So all of you who aspire to be a creative director, that is your career path. I'm serious. My advice to people who want to reach high levels in the game design profession and end up running projects where they actually have to care about every part of that graph, because make no mistake, in a studio large enough, a creative director is in fact in charge of telling the haptics designer what to do, the story designer what to do, the complexity designer what to do, and the social designer what to do. Absolutely, and they need to know enough to tell everybody on the team what to do. And the great games, that creative director tends to, they take in ideas, but they make the calls and they rule with an iron fist. That is actually the solution that has tended to work. So my career advice to all of you is go get a really broad liberal arts education in every field known to man, if that is the job you want, because all of the top designers I know are people like that. And I think there's people in the room who can vouch for this because they know those people too. Miyamoto comes up with this stuff because he goes gardening. Or, you know, and people who are at the top of this field draw from a huge array of inspirations. That was a long question and a long answer. Is there room for one more? Okay.
Hey, love the talk, by the way. That was great. I like the library concept. I was wondering, just for the people here, like, if you were to recommend 5 books.
5?
5. 5, and only one about games. You mentioned Game Fuel before.
Yeah. No. Here. There we go.
There you go.
All right. I would, for mental models, heuristics, and the like, I would probably read Thinking Fast and Slow, possibly Sources of Power. Either of those would work. For certainly the learning process, there's a pile of material out in education. lots of material in the realm of psychology around agency, self-determination theory. That's not one book, but there's multiple kinds of things to go read about. For everything related to haptics and affordances and feel, you know, game feel is pretty good, but so actually are a ton of different kinds of sports materials. There's a lot of studies done down that line. When you start getting into things like ludic structures, you really need to be reading in mathematics. I suggest reading up on graph theory is a pretty accessible entry into that. So stuff like the 6 Degrees kinds of books, all of those are a pretty good way to get into that. Duncan Watts is kind of the primary key researcher, but I really like the work of Albert Laszlo Barabasi because his work is very accessible while still presenting interesting complex problems. Complex math problems are isomorphic across different fields, so that means that once you learn them in graph theory, you can then start applying other fields of math beyond graph theory, and really it's about finding the math version that you feel comfortable with. So you can dig into NP-hard problems and all of that. For social things, the best training is actually history, anthropology, that kind of thing. Jared Diamond is a fantastic entry into looking at some of these things, also very layman accessible. Complexity problems, I guess I talked about that already. Chance, there isn't actually that much to study, but the best sources for looking at it are psychology. Just watch out for the weird problem in psychology research, where most psychology research is performed on white, male, undergraduate psychology students. Once you get into the realm of information display, Edward Tufte is absolutely the best place to go. The books are unfortunately expensive. When you get into the realm of story sense myth and authored story, you pretty much have to go study creative writing. But fortunately, there are actually a fair amount of books. Everybody, of course, starts with the Joseph Campbell type crap, but there's way more than that out there. I don't mean to say crap. It's actually really important, but there's much, much, much more out there to look at and study, and many different kinds of storytelling traditions. I actually have an MFA in poetry, and it has been crazy useful in my career, believe it or not. So, of course, that eventually leads you into the stuff about fun and learning in psychology, and I hate to tell you that the pretty much still only major book on fun is mine. I don't know why that is. It's been 10 years. Somebody else should have done one by now. And that will take you down the line into this. There's actually shockingly little research on meditation, period. Like almost no scientifically rigorous research on it at all. But of course, flow, Csikszentmihalyi is the key place to look for deliberate practice. K. Anders Ericsson. Yeah, that's a decent starter library. Sure.